You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 283.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How is everybody doing today? Hope you're all doing well. And as always, I'm excited to be here to connect with you and share more stories about cookbook writing and cookbook writers. Today on the podcast, I have an interview with Althea Brown. Althea was born and raised in Georgetown, Guyana, and she is the creator and voice behind Metemji, a blog about Guyanese recipes and traditions. After struggling with acid reflux for years, Althea started exploring the possibility that the way she was eating was making her sick. So she shifted her focus to recreate Guyanese and Caribbean recipes to be gluten, dairy, and refined sugar-free. Althea now lives in Aurora, Colorado with her husband and 3 children. And today on the podcast, I have the pleasure to talk to Althea about how she started her blog, her new book, Caribbean Paleo, several delicious recipes from the book, and how Althea balances her work as a blogger and cookbook author while also having 3 children. So without further delay, let's dive into this interview with Althea Brown. Hi, Althea. Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, very excited that you're here. Can't wait to talk about you and your food journey and your cookbook. But before we dive in, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Althea Brown, and I run a blog called metemji.com and all of the social media components of that blog. So you can find me on like Instagram and TikTok. And most of the times I'm talking about my love for Guyanese food and Guyanese traditions. I love to share recipes that are around holidays and religious celebrations and cultural celebrations. But I also share gluten-free, dairy-free, paleo, and Whole30 recipes that I love to call remixes of those traditional things. So I think it's very important for us to understand where recipes come from. And then because I have certain dietary needs, I also think it's okay to remix those recipes to suit those dietary needs. And I know sometimes people are like, no, don't do that to your grandma's recipe. But I think grandma will be okay if she knows that I can now enjoy this without the tummy ache or discomfort that the traditional recipe would have caused, as long as I keep the integrity of the dish intact.
That's right. That's right. So let's talk about your blog first and how you got started in blogging, why you started blogging, and when you started blogging.
So I started my blog in 2013. I was newly married, had a new baby, had moved from New York to Denver. Like all these things were happening all at once. And I realized when I moved to Denver, it was a huge culture shock for me. I had moved from New York where I had my mom's cooking down the street, or I had like any Caribbean cook shop or, other cuisine that you can have access to, and suddenly found myself married in Denver. And my husband's asking me, do you know how to make this Guyanese dish? My husband is also Guyanese, so that's like makes it a little bit complicated sometimes. But and so I found myself calling my mom and saying, Mom, how do you make this one thing? And I had been cooking for a long time, but what I hadn't been really doing was making some of the things that you can get at restaurants or like you can get at a bake shop, because they'd somehow always been accessible to me to just go and buy them. So suddenly now I'm trying to figure out, how do I make, like cheese rolls and pine tarts and all those kinds of things. And then calling my mom and my aunts and asking, how do I make this? And, moms and aunts in Caribbean cultures don't necessarily have recipes that they've written down, don't necessarily have measurements. They kind of know how to do a thing. And it was very hard for my mom to tell me over the phone and for me to figure it out and get it done. And so I started to just kind of write that down here and there, like, okay, I think this is how I do this, and then try and fail, try and fail, try, got it really good. Okay, this version of this works. When she said 1 handful of flour, that looks like it's about a cup and a half. So I'm going to use that next time, kind of thing. And so through all of that, the blog was born, and I started sharing that with my family and friends, and they really were like, "Hey, I tried this and it was like the best version of this thing I've ever had." And oh my god, you should really like share that with other people. And so I started like putting it out there. Funny enough, the blog was first called Honeymooning with Food
Oh,
because I was newly married and I was like, "Oh, that's what I'm doing, sharing food." And back then food blogs were very different, right? It was more about telling your story and your journey and kind of how you got to something, and less about like SEO and making sure you check all these boxes. And so it was really like a hobby, and I would record recipes, um, write them, test them, and write these little stories including fails, and share it, and people really resonated with it.
yeah. And you have a unique name for your blog. Tell us a little bit about what the name means once you switched it over to the new name.
Yeah, so then, once it really got serious, my husband said to me, "Well, how long are you gonna be honeymooning?" Like, I said, "Okay, well, maybe I should, like, get serious and really start thinking about what I wanna share and what I want it to look like." And, MetMG is a stew or soup, depending on how you describe those things, of root vegetables cooked in a coconut milk broth. So, at its core, it's vegan. So just root vegetables, aromatics like onion, garlic, thyme, just really cook down until the oils separate from the fat in the coconut milk. So you have little curdles, and then you add in these root vegetables and you cook them down, and then you serve it with fish. Some people like to do salt fish. Some people do fried fish, and maybe a boiled egg on top. Some people will put some other meats and stuff like that in it. But a really, really like hearty comfort in a bowl, the kind of meal you want to like cozy up on a couch and eat. Well, it was also the thing that my late grandmother made that I absolutely love. And so jokingly, I said, I'll just call it MetMG because I want people to feel filled when they come to this blog the way I feel when I have MetMG. And my friends were like, you should totally call it MetMG. That's really awesome. And so I called it MetMG. But for years, I struggled with it being called MetMG because as it became more popular, as non-Guyanese people started to interact with it, I find myself having to explain what MetMG was all the time versus if I had called it Althea's Kitchen, right?
Hmm.
And so there was a period where I considered renaming it Althea's Kitchen, but my husband, thank God he did said this, said, "No, you like own it. Like there was a reason why you chose this name. You own it. You proudly explain it, and
Yeah.
eventually everyone will understand and will know." And I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah. And it really does connect you to the kind of food that you're actually working with, preparing, cooking, and to your family. And it means something personal to you. And I think that
Yeah.
it's great to continue to keep that name and to um, have to tell people about it and share the story is it's a great thing. So a lot of times when people start
Yeah.
blogs, it's funny how this impetus, like leaving home and needing recipes, and the moms and aunts, they don't write anything down, but we have this desire to want to cook the things that we had access to, maybe from another place. But then your journey even got a little deeper than that, related to the cookbook that we're going to talk about, your cookbook, Caribbean Paleo, that was published uh, last fall. Tell us about that story. What ended up happening that you took this shift, and it's not really a shift, but you made some modifications um, with the type of food that you're cooking and eating, and work that into a cookbook?
Yeah. So in 2016, I started really struggling with acid reflux, to the point where I was like, I'm going to have to live with this for the rest of my life. In fact, my doctor said, here's some medicine. You're going to have those for the rest of your life because the acid reflux and GERD was just really, really bad. At the time, I didn't think that it was the food I was eating that was making me feel sick. I just thought, well, I guess I'm getting older. I guess that's what happens. Like all, all these aches and pains and all this stuff. Well, a coworker was like, "Hey, you know what? I think you should try an elimination diet. I notice every time you eat, that's when you have these flare-ups or whatever." And so I decided, you know what? I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I did the whole 30, and after the whole 30, I felt amazing, and I was able to get off of those medications and have 0 flare-ups. Well, I then went back to eating exactly how I was eating and eating all the foods and the gluten and the blah, 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 and immediately started to feel sick again. So I went back to my doctor and I said, "Something's not right. And so I need to do something else." And he said, "Okay, you're going to have to see a specialist. Like they're going to help you figure it out." It turns out that I don't have celiac, but I am sensitive to gluten, refined sugar, and dairy. And so I noticed that when I have those things in a combination, they're like a gut punch, right? And I started in the back end while continuing to share traditional recipes on my blog, tweaking things that I can eat so that I can then enjoy my food. So for my family, I'm making, these traditional recipes. And then for myself, I'm remixing the things that have gluten and dairy and stuff and using alternative flour and alternative milks and alternative sweeteners and going on that path. My friend who had recommended that I do the elimination diet is paleo,
Hmm.
and she is now a functional medicine coach. And so she had said, "You probably should just eat paleo. Like, I bet that would help you." And again, I was like, "Yeah, you helped me the first time, so let me try paleo." So I started really leaning heavily on paleo, eliminating um, peas and beans and that sort of stuff. And I felt fantastic. And so I realized that that type of eating was serving me more than, say, the traditional things that I was doing.
Yeah. And for our listeners that might not be familiar with what these two different ways of eating mean, would you be willing to tell us about what Whole 30 is and then tell us about what paleo is? Because obviously it's going to be part of what we talk about when you get to what you did with your special foods from your country and how you work these into a whole cookbook concept.
Yeah, and so the paleo, the Whole 30 actually is an elimination diet. So for 30 days, you avoid foods that cause inflammation and have been prone to cause gut issues. So some of the food groups that you eliminate are, you know, gluten, dairy, legumes, some legumes. There's some of them that don't have as great of an effect, so you're allowed to have them. All sugars and sweeteners. So except for fruit juices, and maybe like dates. But the principle of it is to get you to choose whole foods for these 30 days and to have a plate where it's heavy vegetables and then your protein and some fat that fuels your body and get you out of the rut of this like cycle of eating processed food and food for convenience, and really helps you to connect with your gut and know when you're full, when you're, needing something else. Do I need some more carbs because I need some more energy and all that kind of stuff. So at the end of that 30-day, you then reintroduce those foods because what good is it taking it out if you don't know if it did anything, if it
Mhm.
benefited you in any way? And so then after that 30-day period is over, for about 10 to 15 days, depending on what track you're on, you add those foods back in a little at a time with the least problematic foods going first. And then you really pause to say, how did this make me feel? Okay, today I'm going to add back alcohol into my diet. Oh, but I noticed at 2 o'clock that like headache came back or that crash came back. I don't, I'm guessing that that doesn't really serve me. So then you go back to that clean diet for another day and you add in sugar and then you see how you feel and so on and so forth. And you keep doing that and you keep a diary and you say,
Yeah.
you know what, this is how it looks. So the idea there is at the end of the Whole 30, you're really supposed to create a diet, meaning the way you eat and not eating to lose weight, that suits you personally based on how you had reacted to these things, and not necessarily just a blanket prescription that avoid all these foods, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, for instance, my husband, when he did the Whole 30 with me, realized that he, God bless him, can eat absolutely everything with no reaction and felt the same way he feels all the time, which is fantastic.
Hmm.
On the other hand, when I did it, I realized that lots of stuff that I eat, oh my God, when I'm not eating this, I'm like optimal myself. I don't have aches and pains. I don't have acid reflux. The minute I add them in, I need to be grabbing Tums, my joints hurt, all this sort of stuff. So it really, two different individuals, and then you really get that plan that's like a bio individuality thing for yourself. So that's the Whole30. I love it. I've done several Whole30s. I'm no longer doing Whole30s because I know now what foods
Yeah.
impact me, and I've kind of moved on from that. And then the paleo diet is often the natural place that a lot of people who end up having a lot of food sensitivities lean into, because the paleo diet at its core looks a lot like Whole30, but you can use alternative flours and stuff to make different things. In the Whole30, you can't really do that. You're just really trying to eat whole vegetables and fruits and stuff how they come. And with paleo, you can make a cake out of almond flour and dates and stuff like that, and still be doing the paleo diet. And in the same principle, the paleo diet encourages you to avoid things that are known to cause inflammation, known to impact your gut. So again, the dairy, the sugar, the legumes, seed oils, all that stuff, but to really be pro the things that the cave people would have used as their diet. They would have hunted, so all the proteins. They would have gathered nuts and seeds, so those are also in there. They would have had plants and fruits, but they wouldn't have necessarily had grains, because grains have only been a part of our diet recently. So that's kind of the principle of it. I always say that I'm paleo-ish, because I'm not an all or nothing kind of person. And if there's something that you can't have in paleo, but I know personally for me it does nothing, then I will enjoy that. I can't have dairy and I can't have gluten. And so for the most part, I'm dairy free and gluten free. Here and there, I might have a little dairy if I'm testing a recipe, but I'm absolutely 100% gluten free. So that's kind of where I live in the space of
Yeah.
that.
And that's what you learned from being on Whole30 once you took that out and then tried to add it back. With that, those two things were definitely high on the list of things that you couldn't tolerate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so many people go through these journeys, and once they feel so much better, they just want to tell everybody about it. Like, you won't believe how much better I feel. I don't have any shoulder pain anymore. My joints don't hurt. Like you said, I don't have any reflux. I don't have to take medication. And it's amazing that this can happen through the power of what we eat. And what I love about what you did then is you took these foods, whole foods that were working for you, and you took the food that you love to eat from your country, your blog, your family, your moms, your aunts, and you combined the two. What was that like? And tell us what you came up with then when you got to your book, and how this whole journey into the book space then came about.
Yeah. So behind the scenes of my blog, I started tweaking some recipes to be paleo or to not have gluten, and really, really working on nailing those recipes. And I wasn't sharing them on my blog for a while because I thought that the Caribbean community wouldn't be welcoming of that. I thought, what these people are not going to want to hear about gluten-free roti. Like, I know eyes are going to roll. And again, my husband was like, no, you should share your recipes. You should share the things that you're doing. Like, that's who you are as a person. And even if all of them don't like it, I'm sure there's one person out there who's experiencing the same thing. And I said, okay, well, I'll try. And then I started trying and sharing. And to my surprise, those recipes did really well, and people were really, really happy for them, because there were so many people out there who were gluten-free and struggling and hadn't had a thing that they had enjoyed for a while. Over the Christmas break, I have a gluten-free black cake recipe, and black cake is a traditional Christmas Caribbean recipe. And this woman like messaged me this long story in near tears, saying that she hadn't had black cake in years because she has celiac, and somehow she happened upon my recipe And then she made it and sent me like a video of her and her family enjoying it. And I realized that like there were so many other people just like me. And so I started sharing that on my blog. I started getting the attention of other people in the paleo and Whole30 community, then asking me to share more recipes that were similar to that. And then people started asking for a cookbook. So they started saying, when are you going to put all these recipes in a cookbook? And again, when I sat down and started thinking about a cookbook, I started thinking about traditional food because that was like my place where I leaned into. And again, my husband, in when you're going through emotions, you don't realize how important someone is in your life until you start
He's
talking
been
about it.
huge. He's said a few things to you that have kept you moving forward.
He has really kept me moving forward because as I was like, I don't know what version of this book I need to do. And he said, the version that is you. Like that's the version of the book you need to do. Like there will be other Guyanese cookbooks out there, but there will never be one that's representative of who you are as a person. And I was like, gosh, okay, it's very insightful. And so I started to think of if I were to meet someone and I said, hey, I want to cook a meal for you. What would that meal look like? And what were the things I would include? And that's what's in this book, like all 75 recipes that I would ever cook for someone because I wanted to share a meal with them is what I included. And all of them are food that I could eat because that's my biggest struggle when I go to friends' homes. They often forget that I can't eat half the things that they're making. And so then I'm always like, oh, yeah. Like, oh, it's fine. I'll eat when I get home. But I didn't want someone who was like me to have that experience. I wanted them to be able to open this book and say, I want to make potato roti. Oh my gosh, this one's gluten free and grain free. And it tastes exactly like the original one, or the stew tastes exactly like the original one. And it's just a little simple tweak.
Yeah. I love what you said that you were so worried about what the Caribbean community would say or what they might think. And we do this to ourselves. We get this story in our head about how we think people are going to respond to us when we step out being authentically who we are. We're going to share this work with them, but we're so worried about their reaction. Plus, I think part of it probably comes from a place of respect for you, I suspect, respect for the people who've come before you, the people who have, got these recipes to where they are, who've remembered them, who've passed them on. So I don't think it's all like, I'm worried about what they're going to say and you care about it for, I think, a really good reason. But what about the
Yeah.
power of your husband's encouragement in your life? Encouraging you just to be who you are and to embrace what you do and to share it because it makes a difference to, like the woman that made the black cake this Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
no,
not
he
something
has
that
been.
she like, it's seasonal and but it's a special holiday thing. And for her to be able to make that now and have that flavor and that experience of eating that cake around the holiday time, it's huge.
Yeah. And also it's a complicated recipe. So for that to be the first thing that she does, and she said, I can't wait to try other things. And now I'm combing through your recipes. And yeah, my husband has been instrumental. I cannot say that enough because when I started my blog, it was just a hobby. I was just doing it. I was a mom. I had my kid. I was kind of blogging whenever I wanted to blog. I had no like focus or whatever. I did something. I had a little experiment. I thought, okay, I'll share that. And then I'd gone back to work and was like, I don't even want to tell people I have a food blog. Like I'm working in this corporate setting. Like, no. And then I had a third baby and I'm home again. And I'm like, well, now I have three kids. It might be a little bit hard to go back to work. What does that look like? And my husband said, this is 2019. And he said, why don't you give your blog a good go? Because every time you post something, it always does really well. And you get all these views and you're not even making an effort. It's like,
Mhm.
imagine what would happen if you made an effort. And he was like, give it like for a good year, give it a good go. And if nothing happens, then you've given it a good try and then you can do whatever you want to do. And that was 2019 and 2020 is a pandemic. So everyone's home cooking.
Oh yeah.
Everyone wants a recipe. Everyone's like, so everything's going like viral and getting all the views and everything's blowing up. And really, that's when I started to build my community because I really started to hone in on precise measurements and making sure that the recipes that I tried a few times before I share it versus the first version of my blog where sometimes I was sharing that like this failed, but I'll keep trying, I'll come back and share kind of thing. And now it's really getting into the structure of what food blogs look like today and really making sure that I give, alternative for ingredients and actually test those and see how they work and that sort of stuff. So now it's like work, work,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it continues to grow. And I think true to what you said, like I was really concerned about how people would
Yeah.
feel. I still am concerned about like what recipes land on my blog and where I get those recipes from. I didn't want it to be that someone asked me for a recipe and I just Googled and I said, oh, I found one, I'm going to make it and I'll tweak two things and then that becomes my recipe. No, I actually go to my aunts and went to
Yeah.
my mom and how would grandma make this? I remember her making that. I had a conversation with my aunt today about a recipe I'm sharing this week. And I was like, there's a taste in this that I can't narrow down. What am I missing? And we like go through it and she's like, oh, you forgot this ingredient. I'm like, okay, let me add that.
Yeah.
That's how where my recipes come from.
Yeah.
And I really, really started to put all my efforts into this blog. And had my husband never said that, we wouldn't be here today. I would have just been like, probably back at work, probably, or probably just at home with my kids and still having this hobby. But I don't regret it. I don't regret it at all.
Yeah, and it sounds like the pandemic might have helped build the community, but it has stayed, it's growing, and I think that's an amazing message for people that are interested in still working in this space. That people are still looking, they are still interested, and there's new cooks every day who are searching the internet for recipes and for people who can help them with what they want help with.
Yeah.
And it could have been someone just like you when back in 2013 who has moved away. They can't find the foods. They don't have access to the foods that they're used to eating. And then all of a sudden they're in their own place and they want to recreate them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think there is definitely still a space for this. There are people who are starting blogs every day. There are people who are starting social media content and pages every day. And you just have to be true to yourself. Like I say that now, even though for many years I doubted who I was and what I was going to do. But I now have this community and um, I know that they show up for me every day and, that they're trying my recipes and giving me feedback and letting me know
Yeah.
what things are now part of their family. One of the things that I am so proud of is that a lot of people will say, well, I go to you for the measurements, and then I go to my mom for any little secret family thing that she does because my mom's not measuring anything. And I'm like, I'm so honored that, like,
Yeah.
absolutely. And write down what your mom is saying and save it because you'll need that later in life,
Right.
but absolutely.
Yeah. There's something that moms and aunts add to things that it's the heart of it. And it's not just the ingredient list, like you said, or the instructions. There's really something that they all have a way of doing if they have spent a lot of
Yeah.
time in the kitchen, and it's amazing. So, and I think cooking ourselves and experiencing the recipes and being willing to try things and get their commentary and like what did they do, it helps us to become better cooks in that way also. So, it's
Yeah.
wonderful. So, how did this end up leading to a book then for you?
Yeah, so I actually got approached by a publisher. I had
Mhm.
started to like kind of narrow down what I wanted to do, what it's going to look like. I started to do all the research. Do I want to self-publish? Do I want to pitch to publisher? Do I want to do a hybrid model? I started to reach out to people, get quotes and that sort of stuff. I had reached out to this publisher and said, I have a book idea. How do I submit it? And then they said, we have a long waiting list, but here's the process. We're not doing anything right now. And while I'm like getting together what this pitch would look like, the manuscript and that sort of stuff, they reached out to me and said, hey, we just came across you and we have an idea for a cookbook and this is what we think it could look like. What do you think? And so, we worked through that whole process. I had some ideas, they had some ideas. We kind of met in the middle. This book is where we ended up. And I always say that it was so funny because the core of their idea was the book I was already working on. So it was kind of really nice to be like, oh my God, I'm actually working on something very similar to that. Let's kind of see how that could work.
Yeah. I've heard said, and I've said this on the podcast before, but I think it's a great thing for us all to like think about is that when ideas or change are meant to happen, they have to find people to like come through. And it was time for this book. The publisher probably knew somehow that this was time to have a book like this written, but we got to find the person that this book's going to come through. And your perseverance in the journey sets you up for being in the right space to be the person to do it. And you of course had a choice; you could say yes or no. But I just love how opportunities show up when we continue doing what we're supposed to be doing.
No, absolutely. And I felt like I had to say yes because of how it happened, right? I felt like there was some sort of divine intervention going on here because, wow, this is like slapping me in the face that this is what you're working on and this is what they're asking for. So I don't regret doing it. It was so much fun. It was so much work.
It is a lot of work.
You have no idea how much work it is to write a cookbook until you're actually doing a cookbook. You think it's going to was well, I do blog posts all the time. It's going to be easy.
Yeah.
And
tell us what you. I think people would be interested in this. What was the main 2 or 3 things that were so different from blogging versus writing a cookbook?
So I think knowing that these recipes are now written in stone, more or less, right? So with your blog, you forget to add something, you can go back later and change it. You decide to do the recipe a little bit different, you can go back later and change it. But with the cookbook, like this is it, right? There's no like, once everything's settled, there's no like, oh, whoops, I think this would be better. So also the pressure of being sure that these are the recipes that need to go into this book. I remember saying to my editor that I was having nightmares about a recipe I had forgotten. I was saying like, I keep waking up thinking that there's a recipe I've forgotten. And she was like, you'll have another book. Like,
why do we have dreams like that? I just don't understand that. I had a job once and I had to do nutrition assessments in this long-term care facility. I did it for a long time. I love the work, but I would have dreams 5 years later that there was someone newly admitted that I forgot to like assess and visit. And I'm like, that is just those kinds of things. I guess that's what dreams are for. Like it just kind of brings up these subconscious fears that we really do have, but probably wouldn't have happened. In the thing. Yeah. So your maybe there is a recipe you forgot. I don't know.
You know what? Immediately after the book was like already done, I did these 2 recipes on my blog that went like super viral. And everyone was like, are these recipes in the book? And I was like, nope.
No.
Literally just came to me like after I came down of the pressure of that. And I could be my creative self again. These recipes were born, but it's okay. Like you got them for free, So that was the first thing that was very different. The second thing that was very different was I also did all the photography for the cookbook.
Oh, wow.
And I do the photography for my blog, but I'm not very serious about the photography I do for my blog because again, I feel like I can change it at any time. I feel like sometimes I'm doing it on my phone. Like sometimes I take a little photo. I'm like, wow, that looks good. I'll use that for the blog. This was a whole setup and styling and like all this stuff. And I feel like I was experiencing burnout, like creative burnout, because there's some photos I look at it and I'm like, wow, that was the same photo, just a different dish. But I don't think people notice that, but I certainly started to feel it and notice it. And I think that was different. And then doing 75 recipes in a condensed time, you write this manuscript, you've tested these recipes somewhat, you wrote the manuscript, you kind of tweak, you go through, but then you're like actually making it now and like timing everything and really trying to be as precise as you can. And then going through several levels of edit with, an editor and a copy editor, and then making sure that there's continuity throughout the book. And it actually isn't just like individual blog posts. I don't think if you put all my blog posts together, they would be cohesive.
Yeah.
But this book needed to be.
It has to flow.
That's the part, right? That's the part where it's so different. And I always tell this story about how the first version of the manuscript I submitted for the book was this book here, right? But then when I got down to doing like tweaking the recipes and stuff, I changed everything, including like the table of contents. And so when I submitted, like the proposal was this book, but then when I submitted the finished manuscript, my editor called me and she said, like, what is this? This is not what you were sent off to do. And I said, well, I've been reading all these cookbooks and I kind of feel like these styles are better. And she's like, no, we don't want other cookbooks. We want the book you told us you were going to write. And she was like, because like the chapters I had like changed to be like with heat, with um spice, with curries, with like, and those were the titles. And she was like, this, I read this and this makes this doesn't resonate the way those other things were. Like, I want to know what your Caribbean favorites are. Like, I want to go back to that. Like, that's what's calling me. And it also made me realize that like they really wanted me in this book, right? Like, it's not just that they wanted a Caribbean Paleo cookbook, like they wanted my Caribbean Paleo cookbook and they wanted these recipes that are important to me. So I ended up like having to switch some recipes out and change it back and like really go through that storytelling. And I think that also was really hard for
it is hard to go
writing a
back.
cookbook. And like,
I think going back after you get the first one out, like the first draft, and then maybe a few edits, to go back and change that manuscript is like pulling a thread on a sweater.
yeah,
it is. And you sometimes like you probably pretty much had to do it, but it's like painful to go back.
It was
and do
so
it.
painful.
Yeah.
It was so painful, like shifting things back and then realizing that because I had changed the structure of the chapters, I had also changed the number of recipes. So now I have to fill the chapters, right? So now I'm like, oh, wait a minute, but I had eliminated this one because it didn't fit in my new structure, but now I need it back. And now I need two more like it.
Yeah.
So it was a wild, wild experience. And like I said, you don't know until you're in it. And you think you're a writer, but when you have to write a book, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it's interesting. But now that now that you're on the other side of it and the book is here, what would you tell someone listening that maybe is thinking they might want to embark on a project like this, that would provide them with some, encouragement like your husband's given you to like keep moving forward? What's the message that you would send?
I think my number one advice is the same things my husband kept saying to me, that it really is about you, right? No matter who's backing you, no matter who's approached you or how you got that book deal, it really is about you and your story and what you want to see in this book and what that would look like. Because once that book comes out, you're then the one who's selling it and you're then the one who's representing it and who's pushing it. And I couldn't stand before people and talk about this book with the passion that I talk about it, had it not been a book about me personally and how I eat and the recipes I love and have tried and, really got to a point where I know these are all good recipe. Because then the other part of it is the nerves of when people start buying the book and trying the recipes.
I know,
right?
and they're like in a kitchen, maybe in Kentucky, and you don't even like know them, and they're cooking from your book. It's like, oh my gosh! But that had been happening with your blog already, right?
I mean, it has been, but I feel like the blog are all traditional recipes, and even the ones that I remix, they have the traditional base.
This just
and these
felt different.
Too are traditional.
Right.
Yeah, I also feel like people on my blog, they get to read all the background stories, and then they get to see and they get to read what other people have done and said, and that can, like, if they want to, right? Because some people
like reading the comments. If someone's like,
right. And then they can reach out to me, right? They can send me a message and say, hey, Althea, I'm trying this, but I'm missing this. And then I often respond. And I don't know, like someone goes into Barnes and Nobles and buys this book and they go home and they're like, I'm going to make, red stew chicken. And then it's terrible. And they don't know me and they don't care to reach out to me, but they go and leave a nasty review, right?
Did you ever have this experience? People would say, oh, I made such and such recipe out of your cookbook. And I would say, did it work? Because I was always like, oh my gosh, like you did? You mean you bought it and you
Yeah.
cooked out of it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it's just it is
So,
kind of
like,
it is kind of
it's
terrifying.
terrifying. The first person that sent me a review was a video on Instagram. This
Oh,
I
wow.
announced it that she's like my biggest fan because she's tried like 50% of the recipes in the book.
Yeah.
Like she's really hardcore. She has celiac. She's just been trying them. And so she was like, "Hey, I made this recipe from your book." And I'm like,
Oh, no.
"Ooh." And then as the video comes in, and then I'm like, and she's like, 10 out of 10. It's amazing. And
Oh,
then 2 days later, she goes, I had a dinner party and I made your recipe again for the dinner party. And everybody said it's amazing. And I've been like sending them to buy the book. And then I now marinate this chicken and I put it in the freezer because I want to have it as my party trick to make it whenever
oh,
someone's coming over. And I was, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like tears because
exactly. It is
I didn't know
amazing.
what to expect,
You
and
work
so
so hard and you
you
do,
work
and then
so
it's like,
hard. Yeah,
yes, you do. And I think that,
yeah,
that always is a risk that somebody's going to write. Someone told me once one of the cakes was like way too dense and, it didn't work. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to say, but you do feel bad because people take their time, they buy the ingredients and,
ingredients.
their baking powder might not be fresh. It could be old. It could be simple things like that. And I'm like, you can't control all of that. And you don't really have, you can develop a relationship with the community, but people that buy your book, um, I just say you don't know where it's sitting in kitchens somewhere. Who knows where
Yeah,
it is? Yeah, and that's an amazing thing. But you have this way though to extend yourself and to help people in a whole new way, and it might reach a whole new group
yeah,
of people that would never even have searched on the internet for your blog or for the recipes that you had. So, want to talk about some of the recipes? Speaking of some of these good recipes, I saw a couple that tweaked my interest, and I'm going to have to try. The first is tell us about green. Of course, that's my last name. Maybe that's why I was attracted to it. Green seasoning. What that is,
yeah. So
what it means
yeah,
to you, and the Caribbean food that you prepare, and just all about it.
yeah. So green seasoning is really the base for a lot of our recipes. I don't even think that my mom called this green seasoning when I was growing up. I think she just called it seasoning. So you
Mhm.
just knew that it was seasoning. I think when I came to the US, everyone was saying green seasoning, and I realized that it was because it's green in color because of all of the herbs that go into it. And my mom, when I was growing up and she was teaching me how to cook, she would say, when you come from the market, you make your green seasoning, you put it in the fridge so you always have it. You season whatever meats you bought, you put those in the fridge, and then you have your green seasoning to add to your stuff. And so every recipe that my mom did was either like add the oil, add 2 tablespoons of green seasoning, add the onion and garlic. It's really like a pesto. The Haitians make it, they call it a pea. Other Dominicans make it and Puerto Ricans make it, and they just have different names for it. But it really is this like marinade that you make. And people ask me all the time for my green seasoning recipe. And when I was writing this book, I thought I would make green seasoning, but I would do it in 3 different ways to let them know that you can actually make it your own way because every household does it differently. You love garlic, put more garlic in that. You hate celery, don't put celery. I love cilantro. I put that in everything I cook. Put cilantro in it. It really will boost the flavors. But then I also was like, if you want to make it spicy because you like all of your meals spicy, you can add a little bit of, peppers, you can add some tomatoes. And then when I make it for rice dishes, although there are no rice dishes in this book, this was a little nod to my Guyanese people who live on rice. And I thought, even if they bought this book and they're not paleo, but they're buying it to support me, I want them to know that they can use this green seasoning for rice to like amp up their rice recipes. And that's exactly what happened. I had people calling me in the very early days of the book coming out saying, I just made rice and peas and I put the rice green seasoning in it. That's totally not paleo, but that's okay. That's what it's there for.
Yeah, because it's so common. So there's an ingredient you have the oops, sorry about that. My microphone. I'm gonna have to make a note to Scott. You have the basic green seasoning, You have spicy, and that added ginger in the chilies. And then you have a cup of Guyanese Maridmon, is it poke?
Yeah.
Or you can use
Yes.
Thai basil as an addition, plus a tomato.
Yeah. And Maridmon poke is really funny. It really is a basil. That's the Guyanese name for it. And again, I wanted to just include that particular name for that ingredient so that other Guyanese people, when they encounter this cookbook, will be like, "Oh, a Guyanese person wrote this," and feel proud that like one of their own wrote it. But it really is a type of basil that grows in Guyana, and the flavor profile is very similar to Thai basil.
Yeah. So that's neat that you have that. So then look forward to giving that a try. There's also a coconut sweetbread. I think
Oh
I've
my
gotten
God,
on
that
this
one's so
kick
good.
of these dense, like, and you mentioned in the head note you like to have it maybe with a cup of tea, something that isn't really a cookie, but like a cake that you maybe could
Yeah,
make, keep on hand. You
yeah,
serve it to people, but sometimes in the afternoon, if you are having a cup of tea, it's nice to have something like that, or for dessert. So tell us about that. Is it coconut sweetbread?
yeah.
Yeah.
The best way to describe that is like if you had a scone batter, but you put it in a loaf pan and you
Hmm.
baked it, what that would come out and taste like. That's what that dish is. That's what that is about. And my grandmother makes a sweet bread, or made a sweet bread. She's no longer with us, but made a sweet bread that I absolutely love, but can no longer have because it's made with all-purpose wheat flour. And so I thought, if I'm gonna do paleo, but I don't want to do uber like sweet desserts, because I feel like that's counter for everything of like leaning into whole ingredients and eating wholesome. But just in case like you want a little something sweet, right? Like that chapter is called "Little Something Sweet." Um, you can have this. It's a little bit of a coconutty. It has nuts. It has dried fruits. You can vary those fruits depending on what you like, but it's really just gives you that little bit of sweetness,
Yeah.
but really tasty.
Yeah. You said it's kind of like making banana bread, but you use coconut instead of the bananas.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then the dried fruits and nuts in it.
Yeah.
That looked great. So what about you? When you think of the recipes in here, what has been like the one that you think, or the few that you think is really something people should dive into when they look at the book and use the book?
Yeah, so I definitely put all of my favorite recipes up front because I was like I love to read cookbooks like as a normal book, so I'll read it front to back because I really want the stories and I really want to know about, how you got there. But not everyone's going to do that. So if you get this cookbook and you're like, where do I start? Start right in the front, the first chapter, try a couple of those recipes. The jerk chicken under brick is really good. It's your traditional jerk chicken, just using the cooking method of, cooking it under a brick. um, I love the oxtail there, although oxtail is super expensive right now, because you just, you cook it up for a little bit and then you just braise it in the oven, and it takes a while, but it's just cooking. Your home smells amazing while you're doing it, and then you have a delicious meal. And then I don't think this is in the favorites. It might be. I feel like I've moved it, and now I'm not sure. But the pumpkin and cauliflower rice, that one, the pumpkin rice with cauliflower rice and pumpkin,
Hmm.
that one is so good. It's easy, comes together really quickly on the stovetop. It has dried shrimp in there, which is a little bit unusual ingredient, and you can find that at most Asian markets, or I've even seen it at like places like Walmart in like the Mexican sections. But you can also skip the dried shrimp, but it's really good. And right now where it's cold, it's really like cozy and warm. And staying on the on the pumpkin trend, the pumpkin and sweet potato curry is like, I made that a couple weeks ago in December. I made it for some friends that came over, and they were literally like eating it out of the pot because it was so good.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm the spicy fish curry with green mangoes looks really good too.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. Let's talk about ingredient list for a minute, because something that sometimes people say, oh, the ingredient list is too long. But if people get these spices, and some of them, a lot of them, they might even have on hand already, buy the fresh ingredients
Yeah.
to make the green seasoning. The spices are used over and over again in multiple recipes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they have a long shelf life.
Yeah.
So if you want to get some basic spices, definitely get like garam masala. There is a recipe for garam masala in there. You don't have to make garam masala. It's so popular now. It's everywhere sells it.
Hmm.
You just get a basic yellow curry. That one wouldn't have a lot of heat, but because you now know that you can add a spicy green seasoning to your recipe, you have your own heat. And then you get like roasted ground cumin. Again, that's readily accessible at even like your Walmarts. McCormick's make a really great roasted ground cumin that I buy all the time, and it's your shortcut. And so, like for recipes that are curry based, those are the three like spices you will need. And then I try my best to not do things where you have to go out and look for the specific thing, and that like really once you do the green seasoning you have that, and then have like your onion, garlic, tomatoes be the core for mostly every other recipe, because you'll see that it's like half an onion and 4 cloves of garlic. I love garlic, so
Hmm.
it's always like four or more. But I really wanted it to be things that you can just make very quickly or go to the like supermarket and get them.
Yeah. So there might be someone listening to this conversation that's thinking, okay, now how does Althea do all this? She has 3 children. She has a blog. She just published a cookbook, online presence. What advice would you give those of us that are always searching for some sort of balance or system, or, a way that you work this out so that you are living a life and doing this work that you love?
Yeah. I work a lot of hours. I highly do not recommend. I just said to a friend that I was started working for myself so I could have flexible hours, but now I feel like it's so that I can always be working. But I really have a schedule, and I have days when I'm recording content. Like on Mondays, I will do 2 recipes and just record the content, and then I have days where I'm just editing. I have days when, okay, this is an administrative day, so I have to really just sit here and check in and go through things. All 3 of my kids are in school, so from they get on the school bus at 7:15, so about from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock, those are usually my working hours. I try to like sit down first thing in the morning, go through emails, respond to things for that first hour, and then kind of see where I'm going. There are a lot of things that are automated. I have automated responses on my social media so people get recipes and they don't have to wait for me. But then I come back in and have conversations when I can. And you can schedule posts and stuff and get that automated. For a long time, I wasn't doing it because I felt like I would be losing some part of me where I love to just be there and post it and talk to people, but it literally is physically impossible. So
Yeah.
now I've like automated that stuff. This year, I'm starting to think about getting an assistant
Hmm.
and what that looks like. I'm terrible at the financial side of my business. And so I really need to have like a bookkeeper and that sort of stuff. And this year is the year that I'm like, okay, I think I can afford this. I need to invest in it. So that's the other thing. If you can invest in having a team, I highly recommend. There is no glory in being a martyr and doing it all on your own.
Yeah.
You will burn out. I experienced a lot of burnout at the end of last year
Yeah.
and literally had to just take a week off and say, that's it. I'm not doing anything else. I need to be with my family. I need to enjoy the holidays. I'm hoping that that doesn't ever happen again, and trying to take the steps to do that and get that done. My kids have tons of extracurricular activities. I have to chauffeur them all over the place. So I really try to cut off when I stop working at 2 so I can be available for them. That doesn't always happen. I also have an A-type personality. So sometimes if I'm like in the middle of something, I have to finish it. So sometimes they get off the bus and I'm like, I'm wrapping this up. I'll get to you in a couple of minutes. But for the most part, I just try to have a schedule, try to stick to that schedule as best as I can, and to remember, especially in a content creation space, that you don't have to create something, edit it, and post it the same day. That will kill you. So
Hmm.
try to stretch it out as much as you can.
Yeah, I love those ideas. And I think automation is something that has certainly evolved in this space with, the back end of blogs and social media and courses, and the way you can connect different tech things and they can communicate with each other. So automation is really, I think, an amazing thing. And I'm excited about you talking about getting an assistant. I think that one thing that we'll never get back is our time, right?
Yes.
And I do think that people helping us can stretch our time. And so that'll be a very exciting change, I'm sure, for you in 2024.
I can't wait.
Yes. So let's talk about if you have a favorite cookbook as we're wrapping up here. It's been a great conversation talking about you and your book, but I like to find out what people that come on the show, what cookbooks they like, and share those with our audience. So tell us what's on your mind regarding your favorites.
Yeah. So a book I'm really loving right now is Everyone's Table by Chef Gregory Gourdet. He is Haitian, but why I love this book is because he also has a focus on health. And so his recipes are dairy-free and gluten-free. And he has a restaurant now in Oregon, and all the meals are dairy-free and gluten-free, which are just wild. And I can't wait to go to Oregon and try it. And because he has a Caribbean influence, because he does some of the same things that I do in my daily cooking, and he is a professionally trained chef and was on Top Chef and is a Top Chef judge. I just admire him. And also he endorsed my cookbook. And so
that's
when
nice.
I reached out and asked him, and he was like, absolutely, I love what you're doing, I was floored because I'd been a fan of his for years and just really admire everything that he does. So highly recommend. I'm reading this one just like a novel. There are a couple of recipes in there that I have tried, and I'm just the flavors are just so amazing, and they're pretty straightforward. So definitely something for people to pick up and try.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing? Someone said this the other day, cookbooks always have a happy ending.
Yes, for sure.
And I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I'll read a recipe. I feel like I can taste it when I'm reading it. Oh, that just sounds like such a good combination of ingredients, and so fun to read the recipes and see what people are doing. And kudos to Gregory for embracing the work you're doing. I think that we all have our own way of doing food, and bringing our authenticity to it is 90% of the battle and the work that we need to do. And there's so much room. There's so many things to talk about. And I'm really happy that you received such a positive response from him when you reached out to ask for a blurb for your book.
I was floored. I had no idea he even knew who I was.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's fantastic.
And it's like they responded, and he would say, yes, I'd love to. So amazing. Congratulations on that. And on your book. It's great. Caribbean Paleo, 75 wholesome dishes celebrating tropical cuisine and culture. So it's been wonderful to have you on the show, Althea. I wish you nothing but the best. Enjoy continuing to promote your book and the work you do, and hope you have a great 2024.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. Again, all the links can be found in the show notes at www.cookbooklove.co. And if you are interested in writing a cookbook of your own, please check out the free cookbook writing masterclass called How to Get Paid to Write a Cookbook. It is designed specifically for food or nutrition experts, and you can check that out at www.cookbookwritersacademy.com/free. So that's it for today's episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green, and until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.